interesting conversation. I'm going to be quite different from the previous speaker, not least because I'm much older and much slower, but I'll do my best. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here in Maastricht. I see we have quality here tonight rather than quantity, but I'm always much more interested in quantity. Or quality, I'm sorry. I'm interested in quantity too, mind you, but when we're selling seats on board aircraft. It is appropriate to be here because, of course, Ryanair has opened a base in Maastricht this year, and I'm very pleased that Sander Hemmans from the airport, the chief executive of the airport, is here with us tonight. He, together with the heads of all our partner airports, are real pioneers in aviation in Europe today. I would like to think that while we are quite different in the business model and in the business sector from technology and that discussed in the previous presentation, the innovation in our business has been quite phenomenal. And you know, when you can carry out an operation, whether it's a manufacturing operation, a service delivery, or any other process at a fraction of the cost that was previously done. And that generates more economic activity through growth because there's phenomenal demand elasticity in our business. I think that is true innovation. And I'd like to think that we're at the forefront of that innovation. We're doing things that are fundamentally different from how they were done in the past, and that's a good thing in aviation. The sector I work in, the airline industry, has the rather unfortunate reputation of having lost more shareholder value than any other sector of economic activity in the history of publicly quoted companies in the United States, for example. So airlines have lost their shareholders more money than any other sector of activity, with the possible exception of financial services in the last few years, but up to about 2005. So you have a situation, for example, that in 1993, when fuel prices went up again quite highly relative to the previous few years, all the airlines in aggregate in the US lost more money in that 1 year than they had made in the 75 years previously, together, in aggregate. And that's even before 9/11 happened and all the other crises since. So, what's happening as a result of that? There's massive consolidation happening in the United States. You have a situation in the United States today where 4 airlines control 90% of all the traffic in the domestic market in the US. And if you want to be a student of aviation in Europe, you should first be a student of the history of aviation in the United States, because there's a remarkable similarity between the experience there and what happens here 5, 10, 15, 20 years afterwards. And that's what we're facing here in Europe. We're facing a consolidation towards a few efficient airlines and a few inefficient airlines who are protected by their presence at very large hubs like Lufthansa, Air France and British Airways, for example. They're not in any way efficient, but they have a market that's captured and is largely price indifferent at the various hubs that they operate. All the others will be history, because the history in the United States tells us that that's what's happened. And I'm a big believer, if there's any subject that you should have on your business course, and I used to teach in the university in Ireland, if I were to design the curriculum for an undergraduate university program, I would throw everything out except history. The history of business. By the way, you have to question yourself personally as to whether you have the ability and the inclination to learn from history. Of course, we're all too arrogant, well not we're all, but many of us are too arrogant to think that we're the same as the people who went before us. But in fact we are absolutely the same in our behaviour. And we're encountering the same circumstances, so we should learn from that. The one thing that gives me great hope, for example, in the current crisis in the US economy, is that the most significant individual there, Ben Bernanke, is not an economist at all. He's a historian. And his chosen subject, he is probably the leading expert in the US on the 1930s recession. So he is very unlikely to make the same mistakes that they tragically made during that period. In fact, he speaks often about it. And if you had one person, or if you had people, a group of people particularly, to be in charge in a crisis or in a time of opportunity, because both present themselves simultaneously, it should be people who have a knowledge of what went before. Because smart and all as we are in this generation, or in your generation, and we span a few generations together, we're really not encountering anything new in business. We're encountering the same issues that people encountered in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Certainly in economics we are. And we make the same mistakes, unfortunately, because we don't study history enough. Anyway, let me tell you something about the present. A little bit about our history first, and then I'm going to make some predictions about the future, remarkably, for somebody who likes history. Ryanair is Europe's only low-cost carrier. Our difference in cost from the other low-cost carriers is as great, or in many cases greater, than theirs is from the high-cost carriers, and they differentiate themselves. So, for example, I'll talk a fair bit about EasyJet, a fine company, but not a low-cost company or a low-fare company. Because the difference between Ryanair's cost structure, the cost per seat, on which you sit, essentially, which is the unit cost of our business, is further from that cost as lower, percentage-wise, than the cost that EasyJet can produce a seat, then is the difference between them and British Airways. And they clearly differentiate themselves from British Airways. So we're in a sector on our own, and that's very important when we define the business we're in. It is our ultimate competitive advantage. If we can't sell a seat at 10 euros, we lower the fare to 9. If we can't sell it at 9, we lower it at 8. And if we can't sell it at that, we'll give it away for free. But at some point, we will find a price at which the demand meets the supply we have. And then it's only a question of getting the costs into sync so that is a profitable experiment for us. All the time we expand the market because people will travel, because fares are now much more in their neighbourhood, if you like, or in their budget than they previously were. This year we will carry 80 million passengers. With that in context, the second largest airline was Lufthansa with about 65 million on its own. Lufthansa also owns Swiss Air and the Austrian Airlines, which together are a little bit more than 80 million, but we will pass them out in the next year or two. And your own airline here, KLM, is about 26, 27 million passengers. We are the largest travel transaction website in the world, 280 million unique visitors every year. This year, for example, and it's growing faster than our growth in passenger numbers. We have a remarkable coverage across Europe. We're the only pan-European airline. Lots of people talk about this. Lufthansa has 50% of its business in Germany. British Airways has 50% of its business in Britain. Air France has 50% of its business in France. And the rest spread over elsewhere, across Europe and across the world. In Ryanair's case, 20% of our business is in Italy, 20% in Spain, 20% in Britain, 8% in Germany, 8% in Ireland, 5% in Sweden, 5% in Belgium, and so on. And as we add capacity to countries, it grows. Buying something for 10% of a price that you were previously charged by a high fare carrier, the attraction of that is not an Irish attraction, it's not unique to one particular country. It is part of the human condition that people are attracted by airfares of 10 euro when they were previously being charged 100. So that's why we have an immediate calling card in every country we set up base in or set up business in. Allied to that, we have the best customer service. We have the most on-time flights, the least lost bags, and the fewest cancellations. And we have the youngest fleet in Europe, an average age of 305 aircraft of 4 years. By the way, these customer service statistics here, they're not necessarily to please the customers, although it gives us some pleasure that we do that. That's the cheapest way of doing business. It costs us money to be late, it costs us money to lose bags, it costs us money to cancel flights. Under EU regulations, people are entitled to compensation, you have to pay for bag deliveries, etc. So, if you were to take British Airways' rate of losing bags, you would have 40 20-ton trucks travelling 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, delivering bags all over Europe that were lost while in transit with British Airways. They lose bags at a rate that is 90 times more than us. And they're not the worst, by the way. I'll show you the worst in a moment. And Ryanair has 29-year unblemished safety record. What's the formula? The formula is a constant focus on cost and efficiency. Now you must remember that we're competing with people who have lost more shareholder value than any other sector of activity. So it's not that difficult to be more efficient than the clowns who operate legacy carriers and who start from a proposition nobody's ever done a cost-benefit analysis on a business lounge, for example. What's the point in having a business lounge when your competitor can set one up in next door and your customer doesn't pay you any more for it? So you're left with the cost and none of the benefit. And that is the legacy story of all these high-cost airlines. They have all these costs they dare not take away in case they lose passengers, but the passengers won't pay them for it because the competitor has it next door. So we don't have any of that kind of bullshit. We have low-cost, more efficient, bigger aircraft. The biggest aircraft in the low fares business. We have 189 seaters. We have high people productivity through incentives. We incentivize our people. Half our pilot pay, half our cabin crew pay is on the basis of the amount of time they fly. And of course, there's a legal limit on the amount of time they can fly, 900 hours in Europe. When you think about it, those of you who are good at mathematics, divide by 50, number of weeks in the year, 18 hours a week. Contrary to the publicity that you see often about our overworked pilots. This is the most relaxed profession that I know of that pays 100 grand a year, being a pilot. So let's not worry that they're imperiling the safety by being tired. It's not from work they're tired, I can assure you. Perhaps it's golf. But anyway, we have, to give you our productivity metrics, we will carry 10,000 passengers for every employee this year. British Airways carries 750. EasyJet is the next best to us, they carry 5,200. So they're half as productive as our people. So far from paying less than the market, we actually pay more than the market. Why wouldn't we pay more than the market? They're twice as productive as their peers elsewhere. We have lower maintenance costs on new aircraft, higher utilisation, lower costs at secondary airports. Our aircraft turn around in 25 minutes, so we're in and out, and we've disembarked 189 people, taken out 189, all within 25 minutes, and the bags. If you're ready to go, if the team is ready to meet the aircraft on its arrival, and the whole operation is smooth, it happens all the time. And here in Maastricht, we have an excellent operation. But we can get more flights per day per aircraft as a result of that, and your flights are your revenue-generating activity. Internet sales obviously are 99% of our business. We don't deal through any intermediary. So we have turned what was a cost center where travel agents and other intermediaries were taking 7.5% to 10% of our sales revenues through commission into a revenue-generating activity for us on the internet, where with 280 million unique visitors, we are generating over 100 million euros in profit per annum from third-party activities like car rental, hotels, and travel insurance. We have the biggest ancillary sales per passenger for any airline in Europe, over 12 euros per passenger on ancillary activity. They buy this on a discretionary basis when they visit our website, whether it's buying travel insurance, renting a car, booking a hotel room, or whatever. And we offer all those services in a more focused way now, where we have a very strong analytics program on our website, which gives people very specific offers, which we hope will match very closely with their destination and with their requirements, and we get to know their behaviour and the frequency with which they travel to particular destinations much more as we go along. And obviously these profitable ancillary sales are reinvested to lower the costs so that we can fund lower fares, giving more growth, giving us this virtuous cycle that has driven Ryanair from 3 million passengers in 1997 when I joined the company to just short of 80 million passengers in 2012 and onward to about 82 million this year. So, the good news about lowering the cost of fares, as I said earlier on, is that our business has phenomenal demand elasticity. Those of you studying economics will know that. The problem with demand elasticity, of course, is that it works in both ways. If you put down the prices, demand increases. But if you raise prices, demand reduces. And some governments don't understand that. Particularly in the context of austerity, they think they can tax everything. And aviation is a very favourite thing to tax. I mean, the German government, for all its wisdom, and we admire them a lot, has taxed aviation recently with devastating consequences. The Dutch government did it about 7 or 8 years ago and reversed the policy after about 18 months. But when you reduce costs, this is the kind of thing that can happen. Dublin, London had 1 million passengers a year, 1 million passengers a year for about 25 years, no growth. Fares went up on the same day every year when both British Airways and Aer Lingus, remarkably in their wisdom, came to the same conclusion at the same time that fares should go up by the same percentage, 12%. Just shows you the incredible intelligence quotient of these people who came to the same conclusion every year. And fares went up. In 1985, before Ryanair arrived on the scene, the cheapest fare from Dublin to London and it was called, in an abuse of the English language, a Euro budget fare. It was 275 Irish pounds, or 350 euro, right? No wonder there was no growth. Today, 25 years on from Ryanair's incarnation, or more than 25 years, in fact it has declined slightly because of Irish tax that was introduced 4 or 5 years ago, and the UK tax. But at peak, there were 4.8 million passengers on this route, an expansion of 4.8 times. The average fare was about 55 euro, and the lowest fare, well, was 15 euro. And that's the expansion you can get. So when people tell me we can't deliver 500,000 passengers to Maastricht or 1 million passengers to Maastricht, I know that they are poor students of history, number one. And that's the most benign interpretation of those people that I can make. But they certainly don't know anything about demand elasticity, and certainly don't know anything about low fares. Airlines' ability to generate demand. Because there's massive pent-up demand. Aviation has been retarded and restricted through government interference, through regulation, through protectionism in Europe. And the single travel regime, which is now across Europe and spreading to Morocco, for example. Israel just signed a few months ago. Georgia, and other countries are applicant countries, like Tunisia, for example. Egypt is looking at it. Turkey is looking at it. Massive explosion in activity. That's probably the wrong word to use, but a massive growth in activity equivalent to this. And there are many such routes that we fly which have shown this phenomenon. And there are many routes which nobody has ever flown, which are now possible to fly simply because the fares are at a level that will generate demand on those routes. In fact, more than 50% of our route network of 1,500 routes are routes that are monopolies to Ryanair. They're not monopolies in the traditional negative sense of being protected by the law. They're economic monopolies because they're only possible at a fare that is only profitable on a sustainable basis with our cost base. So we can fly from Maastricht to Dublin, for example, because the costs are low at Maastricht, they're not at Dublin, unfortunately, but Ryanair's own operating costs are the lowest in the business. So we can live with an airfare sufficiently low to fill our aircraft on a route that was never flown before. That's just one example. And many of the other routes from Maastricht have never been flown before on a scheduled basis, every day, 3 or 4 days a week. And that's what we're doing now. Because you can do it, once the fares are low enough, you can generate the demand. So, as we move on, Barcelona had a large London, Barcelona. This is not an Irish phenomenon, it's the UK, Ireland, Dublin, London. This is considerable expansion of demand here. We put on a modest amount of growth. Everybody reduced the fares in response to that. And, well, modest amount of capacity, I'm sorry. Everybody put growth on in response to that. And the traffic grew by about 60 to 70% over that period. And that's restricted and could be at least twice or 3 times that if we all put more capacity on there. But there's there are thousands of growth opportunities across Europe. So let's not be hung up on something like London, Barcelona. Interestingly enough, we are, when you're, as we are doing, making omelets, in our business, you break eggs and you step on people's toes. And there is nothing more conservative in Europe and more union-infested in Europe than newspapers and media, right? So we get pretty bad media and pretty negative media, much, if not all, but much of it based on conjecture and bias, downright bias. We regularly run surveys online, and we run them with massive amounts of respondents. So the most recent one I thought I'd share with you. For example, there's a firm called Skytrax, S-K-Y-T-R-A-X, which some of you may be familiar with, which hates Ryanair because we don't pay to be part of Skytrax, right? Now they pronounced Turkish Airlines the most popular airline in Europe. They had 750 respondents, right, in the whole year. This is the scale of Skytrax. It's a joke. But of course, when you pay for this kind of coverage, as Turkish Airlines will do, they then go out and mistakenly say they're the best airline in Europe, which by any parameter, just because they're paying Kobe Bryant and Lionel Messi some enormous amounts of money doesn't just make them the best airline in Europe. There are objective criteria, and Turkish meets none of them. So they will have to remove that particular aberration that they've had rather expensively and mistakenly when the consumer authorities to whom we've complained about go about this. We're not claiming to be the best in Europe, we just claim to be the biggest. We think we're the best because we have the lowest fares, but there are some objective criteria that we could argue that there are. There are none. Just because you pay Skytrax a lot of money and they claim that on the basis of a small survey you're the largest or the best in Europe, that's, I'm afraid, an invalid basis upon which to make this assertion. Our assertion is based on 10,000 passengers who responded to our survey in December. 87% said they were satisfied or very satisfied with the Ryanair flight. 93% would fly again with us. 95% said Ryanair provide excellent value for money. And 84% would recommend Ryanair to a friend, probably if they had a friend. But anyway, we won't speculate on that. Before I go further, I thought I should give you a little bit of background as to what's happening. We talked about the historical development in the US and the consolidation that's happening, and that's important to know that. You probably, as disinterested spectators on our business and many other businesses in other sectors, hear about things from time to time. I thought I should just summarise for you what's been happening in the last 12 months in Europe. And it's been pretty devastating in terms of the consolidation that's been happening. Spanair, the third largest airline in Spain, went bust in January of last year. Malta, the national carrier in Hungary, went bust. And BMI Baby in the UK went bust in September. Together, that removed approximately 26 million passengers out of a total market of about 700 million. When I talk about the market, I talk about those flights that begin and end their journey in Europe, including domestic flights, including, by the way, Europe, Morocco, and Israel, etc. And then in the case of the flag carrier airlines, look at the job losses that are happening here, and the low-cost carriers are also consolidating, so-called low-cost carriers, right? Including people who masquerade very much like that, Air Berlin and so on, Meridiana in Italy and so on. So there's massive consolidation going on, but at the same time, the one airline that stands out with the lowest costs, Ryanair, is growing. And if you look at, this is where I get into the projection and the futuristic business. We have recently had a look at what's going to happen, and this is our prediction about what's going to happen in Europe over the next 5 to 6 years. We have recently placed the largest order for short-haul aircraft ever placed by a European airline with Boeing, 175 short-haul aircraft. This is in one go. We have 305 of the existing of those aircraft already. We're taking 175 more over the next 5 years. And in terms of seat capacity, now seat capacity, we sell about 81-82% of our seats. So, and other airlines vary. Some much less. Some of the high fare carriers sell 60% of their seats in certain months, but an average of 80% of the seats would be sold. We're dealing here with capacity of seats. When I talked about 700,000, in 2013 here, there are 849 seats available. So, like here, some of the seats are empty, and when you go onto some aircraft, some of the seats are empty. That's the capacity that's unutilized. The total capacity is about 849. We expect that to grow to 963 million by 2018. That's 114 million passengers. And we will be 43 million of that growth. We will be almost 40% of the growth in European aviation in the next 6 years. We know that from orders placed by existing airlines. We know it from what, for example, EasyJet are on the verge of placing an order, and they've said they're going to grow at a certain level. They're about number 6, EasyJet statements. Norwegian will grow substantially. A lot of the flag carriers were making the very benign assumption that they will actually be the same. History tells us they will reduce their traffic, in fact. But what's remarkable is Ryanair today is about 13% or 14% of the total market. We expect to be about 20% of the total market when this is finished in 2019. We're growing much faster than the market, and in fact, in many cases, it's going backwards. So, and there is the continent is replete with opportunities to grow. On average, most of our airports operate at about 50% capacity. So, you know, the EU, the Commission, is fixated on 3 airports in Europe, Frankfurt, Paris and London, Heathrow, and they talk about the congestion at these airports as if that were the whole of aviation. That represents about 15% of the total market. The rest of the market, as with Maastricht, for example, is substantially underserved from a capacity point of view. And these airports are there, and they are assets, not liabilities, as some people think. They're assets to be used. They can move people, they can generate economic activity, and you get a massive multiplier effect from the aviation activity that we and other airlines generate. So when I talked earlier on about the innovation of being able to fly people around at 10% of the cost of what was previously the case, that's good in itself, but the economic activity it generates is phenomenal. So for example, when we bring passengers to the Canary Islands in Spain, I use that as just as an example, they work very closely with us. The government down there tells us that for every passenger that we charge 70 euros to bring them from, for example, Eindhoven or London to Tenerife, that passenger will spend 1,200 euros while he's there for a week, with massive economic consequences for the local tourism industry principally, things like hotels, restaurants, car rental, bars, all sorts of other leisure activities and so on. So the multiplier fallout, both in terms of expenditure and very high labour employment content of these activities, is quite phenomenal. In fact, as one of the countries in Europe which is currently being effectively governed by the IMF and its partners in ECB and so on, the European Commission in Ireland, the Troika, they're as they're known, is very much associated with austerity, but they also have a parallel program for growth in Greece, in Cyprus, in Portugal, in Spain and in Ireland. And the number one or number two item on that is the development of tourism. Not many people look at that. We look at it a lot. And the Portuguese, for example, and the Greeks are responding very actively to that. We see huge potential in these countries to grow the economy, and particularly to grow the economy outside of the capital cities and have regional development. All these very benevolent and beneficial consequences of reducing the cost of access. The big impediment to tourism growth is the cost of getting to where you're going. And people don't understand that. You see, India, I don't know if any of you watch CNN, but India's tourism board advertises on CNN. I can suspect why, but it doesn't generate one extra tourist if every seat flying to Delhi or to Madras or Calcutta is full. The way to generate more activity is to put more aircraft in the skies, put more seats available, and fill them at lower and lower fares. And the people who go there spend the same amount of money. In fact, they spend more because they spend less on the airfare. And we know that consistently. So the advertising of people, it's like advertising something in a store and locking the door if you don't have the method of getting your tourists to your destination. And that's critical. And we are convincing more and more people of the added value of our business, the downstream added value of our business for their destination. Not just at the airport. There is considerable economic activity at each airport, but also in the wider economy, particularly those economies that are dependent on tourism. And who isn't? It's the second largest industry on the planet, and in Europe it has been neglected. If you look at, for example, Turkey itself as a country, I was thinking Turkish Airlines, Turkey has done fantastic work in developing its tourism over the last number of years, largely based on relatively low cost, not Turkish Airlines, but charter companies, but they can grow even more with low cost airlines in the future. And they have stolen considerable market share from the likes of Spain. It's part of Spain's economic problem that they've lost market share in that area. So but there is much to do. One of the things we look at is the propensity of people to fly in individual countries. So we look at, for example, the country's population and the number of flights and the number of flights per head of that population, and then the propensity of that country to grow. So if you look at two countries that are not too dissimilar in population, Spain and Poland, for example, both of which Ryanair is the number one airline in each country, and both of which have a fantastic airport structure, largely underutilized. Spain has 150 million passengers, short-haul passengers, and Poland has a tenth of that, 15 million. What that says to me is that the potential to grow somewhere like in Poland is massive. Now, it doesn't have sunshine in the summer, it may have a lot of deficiencies in terms of its tourist potential, but it has a growing middle class, and it certainly has potential to double to 30 million and still be 1/5 the size of Spain. And it has the airport infrastructure, and it has the underlying growth in GNP and personal disposable income to underpin that level of growth. So we devote resources into that country, and we are obviously with the leading market position there, are in a unique position to exploit the growing potential of that market. And we measure all the potential. Some of these countries, like Ireland for example, have high propensities to travel because we're an island. A lot of the journeys that we have out of Ireland to the UK would not, if we were joined to the UK and not an island, would be driven. They wouldn't be flown. Similar journeys on the continent, for example, are driven. But that said, some countries, for example, like Greece, which are not on this but are much lower down the scale, similar to Poland, are effectively islands. They're removed from their countries which they want to commute to, like Italy, Germany, and so on. So the only alternative is to fly there, and yet high fares have retarded the level of activity. Now, when you have low fares, first of all, I just want to show you the growth of our business here in the Netherlands. I talked about the introduction of air passenger duty here in the Netherlands in 2008. It led to a slight deep reduction in our traffic from 2008 to 2009. In a very wise move, the government removed it after 12 months, and growth resumed spectacularly, up to the level we're at now. Our 3 airports here, Eindhoven, Groningen, and Maastricht, and we are about the 3rd largest airline in the Netherlands after KLM and Transavia. Similarly, but sadly, in Germany, we were enjoying spectacular growth until the German government taxed travel in a very negative and regressive move, and has imperiled a lot of airports in Germany as a result, and indeed, has done incredible damage to, for example, Air Berlin, who were actually damaged before that, but this has been a mortal wound. Air Berlin, this tax has cost Air Berlin about 100 million per annum in costs, which the passengers are not prepared to pay, frankly. This is a business in which you must be competitive with fares, and Air Berlin were not able to pass that on. They became a revenue collector for the government in Germany, with consequential loss of employment and a spiral downwards from high taxation. So, this is what happens when you have low fares, and this is an unthinkable prospect a few months back. But here's the base in Maastricht-Aachen with 15 routes, over half a million passengers, and the Airports Council, the international governing body for airports, tell us that has generated 550 direct jobs at the airport, with 108 million in savings for the passengers, as against the high fare carriers that they could alternatively travel with to these destinations. In Eindhoven, we have a base with 1 base aircraft, 31 routes, and 1.7 million passengers similarly. This is more mature, it's longer developed than Maastricht. We have every confidence Maastricht can grow to the levels of Eindhoven in time. Similarly, in Düsseldorf-Weeze, we serve this market broadly with 9 based aircraft, 57 routes, creating 2,700 jobs and saving over €500 million on comparative airfares from high fare carriers. And in Cologne, most recently, we have a base in Cologne, but we serve 5 routes there, and we'll carry 340,000 passengers there after we'd only started there a year ago. So there's phenomenal growth potential, and a lot of this traffic, not necessarily to these destinations, but from Dublin and from London, is inbound to these regions, both from a tourism and a business perspective, very important. So we have a double daily service in the morning and the evening from London to Eindhoven, for example, which business people tell us is very useful for their purposes as well. This is the entire coverage of Ryanair's network, 57 bases, a genuine pan-European operation at 29 countries, with 305 737-800s operating this year, and we will carry just over 80 million passengers, about 82 million passengers in the current year. Just a little brief note for you business students about the way we run our business. Our business is a commodity. I mean, I think if you're genuinely humble in our business, in business, and you should be humble, you should always think that there's going to be somebody that's better than you. You can only be pleasantly surprised. And anyway, it's probably true that there will be somebody who's better than you. Somebody who will eventually eat your lunch.
Andrew Grove, one of the founders of Intel, Intel, who make chips for personal computers, among other things, their competitive advantage was to double the capacity of those chips every 3 years. That's easy when you're going from 1 to 2, and 2 to 4, and 4 to 8, and so on. You begin to lose the arithmetic now. But you eventually get up from 64K to 128, and the thing gets bloody demanding. But that was their competitive advantage. And that was the imperative in the company to survive, to improve the speed of performance. Our competitive advantage is to be the lowest cost operator. Everything we do is about reducing costs. And he had this wonderful phrase, that only the paranoid survive. And we apply that in Ryanair. You must be paranoid. And even if it's not true, and in our case it probably is true, only that people are out to get it, so it's appropriate to be paranoid. There is competition everywhere. In our business, there's competition for people's €50, which is our average fare. They can go to dinner, they needn't fly to Girona, they needn't fly to Alicante, they can go to dinner locally, they can go to a football game, they can do something else. So we have to compete aggressively with all sorts of other opportunities that people have to spend their discretionary income. Because we're way ahead of the competition. And we need to stay way ahead of the competition, but we also need to be competitive for people's leisure euro or leisure dollars if it's stay in the US. And that is a very big imperative for Ryanair. So, others can enter the business very cheaply. You can lease aircraft, you can set up an airline, and you can operate very quickly within 6 months at quite some size. So therefore, we must continuously improve, and we must have continuous cost reduction. And we're constantly on a journey, and we never arrive. So, every meeting in Ryanair is about cost reduction. Because once you define the business you're in, whether it is doubling the power of that chip, or being the lowest cost operator, you must focus all your energy on that. Warren Buffett said that in the commodity business, in the long run, only the lowest cost operator survives. And I entirely agree with that proposition. And that's why the consolidation that's happening in Europe is giving Ryanair a bigger market share. We're seeing the manifestation of that right before our eyes. I've talked about how it's happened in the US, that's the history lesson. The future is there, as I pointed out. We will have 20% of the business up from 12, 13% currently in 5 to 6 years' time. And onward to 25 and 30% as the opportunities present themselves to us and as we buy more and more aircraft. Provided we keep our shape, provided we keep focused on low costs, provided we do all these sorts of things. We abolished highlighters at work. We took ice out of the gin and tonics. Because we're 35,000 feet, if you don't like the gin and tonic, you really can't go to the bar next door. So we don't, the guy who made the ice was charging us, and we said, right, our customers will do it without the ice, and we made that decision. We steal stationery when we go to hotels, we steal biros, so look out. Obviously, the big things, like all our distribution's on the internet now, we don't distribute to third parties. And all of this is in the interest of reducing the cost of activity so we can go back with the certainty that at some point passengers will travel with us at a fare, and hopefully we have reduced our costs enough to make that fare a profitable proposition. Then we have a route that can succeed. It's only then a question of deciding whether the supply onto that route is a daily service or 3 times a week or maybe twice daily or whatever, depending on the fare. So those are the decisions we make. But the underlying dynamic that's in our control is to get the cost of operation at its lowest level and at its most efficient. So we simplify everything we do, not the way we spell, by the way, but we certainly simplify the process. If you watch how Ryanair aircraft are turned around and the way we fly, we manage about 120 different parameters in the cockpit through computer feedback back to the center. So every pilot is monitored in the way they fly at certain points in the flight from the time they're pushed back at the airport, first airport, origination airport, to the time they reach the destination airport. We simplify all that. We simplify the way we manage. It's very direct, very straight, only about 3 layers of management, and in the way we communicate. There have been many, many case studies about Ryanair, and all of them end in disappointment because Harvard started off, they've had about 3 or 4 runs at Ryanair trying to find something different. And I remember one gentleman in particular came to talk to all the management, And after a few hours, he said, "This is ridiculous. You're all giving me the same bullshit. This is rehearsed. You know, you're all talking about cost. I don't believe it." So we operate an open plan office with 200 or 300 people in the head office, and he was invited by the head of HR to go and talk to anybody, free. All the staff, junior staff to senior staff. And he came back after an hour and said, "This is uncanny, everybody's giving me the same bullshit." And it is unrehearsed, because they all know. Low cost, low cost, low cost. I'll be asking you questions later on, the most frequent word I use, and you better remember it. But it is low cost, right? Just in case there's any misunderstanding. And everybody understands that. And when they go out to talk to airports, when they go out to talk to tourism partners, to governments who are going to get the benefit of our passengers when we bring to the Canary Islands and Greece, etc., and who will deliver huge value to local communities, we want to share that action. That will reduce our cost of operation. And that's the imperative for us, because we're creating the demand. These people don't wake up in the morning and want to go to Dublin from Maastricht, or they don't want to go to Palma de Mallorca. Maybe they do, but they certainly don't want to pay 300 euros to do it. They want to pay 50 euros to do it, and we're the only airline that can profitably offer them a 50 euro fare on a sustainable basis. So they're our passengers. By definition, they're our passengers, because we're the only airline that can offer them what they want at the price they want. So therefore, with all due respect to those of you who are our passengers, we can sell you to destinations. And that's the principle of our business. And those destinations, you know, are making a lot of money from you and people who travel with us. So we should, in your interest, in the interest of reducing fares for you, we should negotiate a good price with those people. And there are various governments who pay Ryanair very significant amounts of money to bring tourists. And why wouldn't they? Because we bring huge value. If the government of the Canary Islands can give us a discount of €10 and earn revenue of €1,200, I can't think that they've ever made such a stunning return on an investment before. So they should continue to do more of it. And they do. And others do it as well. So that's the proposition we have. And it is based on an absolute clarity. And we're reinforcing the indicators of success, with the first one being cost control. And again, we in terms of dealing with individuals within the company, the individual contribution that people can make is emphasized to them. They assume significant responsibility at a young age to enhance the company's bottom line by making their individual contribution. And that's very important to us. Because everybody who does from Ryanair is an ambassador of cost reduction, I suppose you could call them.